Welcome everyone to another episode of Kiwi Talks. My guest today is an artist of over 22 years who has worked on games, movies, medical CGI projects, but he's probably best known for the work on Star Wars Rogue Squadron games, Rogue Leader and Rebel Strike. I'd like to welcome Kursad Karatas. How are you?
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Reese.
I appreciate you taking time out. I'm sure you're a busy,
Oh
busy
yeah,
man.
awesome. Yeah, awesome.
How was it working on Star Wars? I'm not sure if you were much of a Star Wars fan back in the day, or was it something that just caught you completely off guard? How was that experience?
Yeah, well, I was originally an Alien fan, and I,
Nice.
the, I wasn't really like if it said there's a dichotomy between Alien and Star Wars universe, but I was originally an Alien fan because I like to work on creatures, stuff like that, and that's one of the reasons I started working in 3D because I figured I could make creatures. And so that's how I started back then around 1996. Started with Real 3D, Imagine 3D on PC, and then moved on to Lightwave. And I started making like some creatures, some models. Um, Back then, it wasn't as easy to make these stuff, especially given the hardwares. Like I'm talking about 8486 kind of hardware where you have like you're on a 100 megahertz computer or 200, no graphics cards, no nothing. So it was really hard, and there weren't really many learning resources out there, like no YouTube, no internet, was mostly text. So it was really a hard time to really get into it. But the good thing was that there were many people doing it back then. So that's how kind of I started. And I started doing, like creatures, kind of goofy stuff, trying to attempt to model human beings, etc. So somehow someone saw my work and shared with their friend, and their friends were working at Factor 5, and they needed someone to build, work on some creature stuff, and mainly creatures, but some other stuff too. So that's how I got into the Star Wars stuff, basically because there were many people who were making this stuff, and I was able to do them and on low hardware, cheap hardware, software, if you will. So that's how I got into games. Games weren't really in my mind, but I come from a retro background, like Commodore 64, Amiga. Games are always part of our childhood, but not necessarily as a profession. But then I figure, hey, this is 3D. I'll make 3D stuff. I'll make computer graphics. It didn't really, the context didn't really matter, or the content didn't really matter to me, because all I wanted to do was just model, texture, render, animate, stuff like that. So that's how I got into it. But I wasn't, like I said, I was more into alien stuff. And then once I started working on Star Wars, I realized, some of their stuff is on the little goofy side, like creatures
It is, yes.
designs. But what I realized that their production value was really high quality. Like they'll the movies themselves or the games, like you are working with like really high quality production environments, if you will, like really talented people. Sometimes a lot of reference, sometimes not. But I was able to kind of fit in well in that universe, in the Star Wars universe, when we were making the games, if you will. And there are a lot of people who knew Star Wars. I didn't need to make guesses. I will be told what to do and how to maneuver through the content and look at the references. So that's how I got into the Star Wars games. And yeah, I'll say I wasn't necessarily a fan, but I became involved in the Star Wars projects. Okay,
So,
just looked like that. This was the initial process. Yeah.
yeah. So, did you guys get reference material from, like, say, LucasArts or ILM?
Yeah, so the one thing is, like, when you generally work in games nowadays, like you will have concept artists, you will have a lot of like other type of artists where they'll design these characters, like the spaceships, environments, or you will be doing them prior to production work. But in the Star Wars case, there are a lot of reference. At least the movies were out there. So given the work that we were doing were based on the movies, right?
Hmm.
So we had the movies, but sometimes we will have some little more reference, sometimes not as much. Um, I mean, we were next to LucasArts basically. The Factor 5's building was really like a couple meters away from LucasArts, if you will. And we were doing exclusively LucasArts materials, and the games were wise. So I'm sure there were some, more organic talks between them regarding how the content should be going forward, how it should be created. But on the ground, I didn't necessarily have the, like I wasn't able to like ask for, hey, can I get this reference? I'll just talk to the managers, and most likely we'll get them, or we will just have the DVDs and just check out through the DVDs or the frames. Because we were mostly trying to create the Star Wars experience, like we weren't really trying to create a unique game. And in the Star Wars movies, they all did all the legwork regarding the designs and the concept art and the environments. And having the movies was a good, you can always reference. That's like your ground truth, if you will.
Yeah, well, I suppose because there was the original Rogue Squadron game as well that you could
Right.
also reference. You could go back and look at that game and see what you guys
Yeah.
did. I mean, you didn't
Yeah.
work on the first game, but I
I
suppose you could use it as a reference point, right?
Right. But sometimes, I mean, some of the stuff you don't necessarily need to know a lot. Like if you only have a frame of a creature, you can kind of get it if you know how to do it. Do you know what I mean? Like even I remember working on some of the creatures where I didn't necessarily have like reference like books or anything, only just some frame or two from a movie. So you just kind of work your way through until it looks good in the game. And sometimes these things weren't necessarily, you weren't really doing 360 around them, right? They were part of a cutscene. You were looking at them from a distance. So you need to kind of be smart about how you're going about it, and kind of make a decent production asset that looks good for the time being on that particular hardware.
Yeah, so I suppose obviously there's cases in the game, I think specifically Rogue Leader, which are
Mhm.
taken directly from the film. So say like the
Right,
Hoth and the Death Star, right? So
right.
I mean, I'm trying to put myself in your position, but you
Yeah.
could theoretically just go to the movies and then maybe just use a
Mhm.
still frame if you didn't have
Yeah.
a direct reference.
Yeah, that's kind of what we did. That's kind of what we did. Sometimes we didn't necessarily have like, there weren't, like I said, internet wasn't really full of Star Wars references back then.
Hmm.
Yeah. Finding a picture on the internet was a big thing. If you it's like finding a Bitcoin, right? It was because internet was very small, and the bandwidths weren't really high as much as today, like 1 or 2 kilobytes a second or 5 kilobytes a second. So, and storage was limited also. So basically most of it was, like you said, just checking out the movie, because we were also, if I remember right, we were just uh, creating like certain, like our levels were based on the movies. Like you're trying to create this experience that was like this chase experience, or like a going after a certain kind of character kind of experience. So it wasn't like it was too hard at the same time. It was hard that we didn't have like an epic, 10 drawings of Chewbacca, or a like a 25 scans of Luke Skywalker. You know what I mean? We didn't have any of that. We only had if we had the books, couple books, and we had the movies, like you said.
Hmm.
But nowadays things are much different, right? Like people have all kinds of references, videos, 3D scans.
Yeah, you've got endless reference material these days.
Yeah,
Even
right,
if even if
right.
LucasArts didn't give you anything, you'd have so much to go off. So I imagine it would be a lot more streamlined.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Back then, I don't remember. Maybe LucasArts gave or ILM gave one or two models or references, but I remember most of the stuff that we built them from scratch. Like, for instance, I was mainly responsible for the organic models, except the humans, because they needed a special care, and I was more in the like creating all the creatures or the foliage and stuff like that. and our team was very small. We were a couple modelers. I was the only one, I believe, doing the texturing and the modeling at the same time. A couple modelers, couple texture artists, a couple level designers, and we were just creating most of it from scratch. Thinking retroactively, it feels a bit impressive that we did all that at that time, given the hardware limitations and time budgetary limitations. And GameCube was new, right? It wasn't even out there. You couldn't play I was never able to play the game on that hardware myself while we were
Really?
working. Well, because there were only one or two dev kits in the studio, and then
Ah,
you only basically the dev kits were mainly shared for between I believe the level designers and the programmers. The artists didn't really have a developer kit. The hardware didn't exist at that time, right? um, and it was like we didn't necessarily have a way to test our models, unlike nowadays where you could you know test your models in Unreal, even if you're working for some mobile phone, right? If you're going to export to
hmm.
a mobile platform, you can still test your look or the asset inside the game and in the gameplay using Unreal or Unity or Godot game engine, right? So back then we didn't have an engine that will be running on our computers. The engine was, if I remember right, was running on the hardware on those couple limited GameCube developer kits. So if you need to see the model, you have to tell the level designers, and level designers will put in the level when they have time or when it's part of the level, and then we will check them. So it was a little working in
Wow.
the dark at the same time. Yeah, yeah,
That seems like a long drawn out process just to do it.
yeah, yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm now impressed that that I'm now talking about it. Right? I'm now impressed that we did that without actually being able to test all that stuff on the hardware. Because, like I said, I think Rogue Leader was an exclusive GameCube exclusive for the launch
Yes,
type.
it was. You still can't
Yeah.
even play it
So
anywhere. You can't play it
yeah,
anywhere else, even these days.
yeah. Sorry about that. Maybe we will see. Like it would be nice to play another hardware too. But uh, so basically, like I said, we weren't really able to test our stuff. We were just working in Maya. I think that was Maya 2. This is the year 2000 and 2001. And we were working in Maya, and we will just create the textures in Photoshop. There wasn't any like necessarily a 3D texture painting. We will just export our UV layouts and paint them in Photoshop, and then kind of do a rough test, just make sure the texture looks okay in the Maya viewport, and then we will be exporting them, and they'll be exported and bundled for the hardware overnight. I think they were compiling the game overnight, and in the morning, the level designers and the programmers they'll test the levels, and then once they do that, we might get some feedback. Oh, this model looks broken, or this texture looks broken, or this needs this. Yeah. And then we will just operate based on those feedbacks afterwards.
So you mentioned you never got any of the dev kits. So does that mean that you didn't actually get to play the game properly until it was released?
Yeah, that's right. That's
What?
right. That's right. I mean, here's the thing though. There might have been some parties where like you will be playing, like people will get together, play a finished level, but like I said, I mean, you need to understand these development kits, they are rare, right? Like they are sent from Nintendo.
Hmm.
They are sending it to you, and you're under intense NDAs, and they are sending it to this stuff to work on specific hardware that doesn't exist, right? And these hardwares, they weren't really finalized, I believe. Like they're also working on it at the same time while we're working on the game, the software side. I'm sure they are also constantly testing and getting feedback from our programmers, sending patches, maybe writing better compilers. So I think it was always that kind of process was more organic back then between the developers and the hardware developers. Right
Interesting.
now, you are a little more abstracted, I believe. You're not necessarily unless you're like say PlayStation exclusive developer, you might be doing that still. But for the other game developers, you don't really do that kind of exclusive hardware deals with the uh, hardware manufacturers. Like let's say you're working on Android game, you won't be able to really get in contact with Google and say, hey, I want this improved for myself so that my game runs a little better, stuff like that.
Yeah. Because with Rogue Squadron 3 Rebel Strike, there were on foot
Right.
missions, right, with actual characters as opposed to
Yeah.
in the other games,
Yeah.
right? Because I
Right.
imagine in the other games, if you had people in the games, they'd be tiny little minuscule, almost
Yeah.
like stick men, so you wouldn't have to have
Right.
much geometric detail. So
Right.
with Rebel Strike, because obviously I've seen your picture where I think it was you did Chewie and one of the Death Star, what is it, Death Star Imperial pilots, I think that you did.
Yeah, that was a shadow. Like I did a lot of them. The ones that you saw on my website, I only put a couple of them. I modeled like some scientists, some like this pig like what's his name? Pig like on Sarlacc pit level, pig like character, Gamorrean, something like that.
Oh yeah.
And I did like Covenant lizard guy, or I think I model a lot of like tons of characters, but these are all, like you said, they're always generally they're very small on the ground. Or for the Rebel Strike, we see them a couple of them, like Chewbacca one. I think it's in the this like you're with him and the one of the levels. You're kind of walking around or running around with Chewbacca and a couple other characters. But most, like you said, most of the characters for the rogue leader, they were generally on the ground or in the cutscenes, I believe. And for the Rebel Strike, we had to do a little more detailed versions of them.
Hmm. So what do you find easier to draw? More character based things or say technological based things like ships or science fiction stuff or environmental backgrounds? Like what's the thing that you feel that you're a master at in terms of drawing?
Well, I think that I was originally like always anything like let's talk about the from the stuff from the game. I mean, anytime there's some kind of organic looking thing, or it's like it will be on me. No one else will take it.
Okay.
So basically, yeah, I like to work on more organic stuff, but over the years I worked on all kinds of production stuff, so I know how to do the other stuff. But if I'm gonna do it myself, I try to do more organic or creatures stuff like that, or humanoid stuff basically, which is kind of the mix that I did for the Rogue Leader and the Rogue Leader and Rebel Strike games.
How much of the prequels influenced the game at all? Because I'm trying to think, like Phantom Menace, I think had just come out. I'm trying to remember
Yeah,
when, because I think Rogue Leader, what, it released in 2001, was it?
yeah, that was 2001. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So Phantom Menace was out. I don't think Attack
I
of the
think we
Clones
had the
was out.
droids in the in Rebel Strike one. So we had probably a couple. If I remember that the droid soldiers were in these new movies, and then we had them in the foot missions too.
Because I've seen your
But
little stencil drawing of Liam Neeson, right? From Phantom
yeah,
Menace.
yeah, yeah.
Was that,
But that was I done much later, years
oh, years
later. I
later.
done it. Yeah, yeah, years later. Yeah, not at the same time frame. Yeah.
Well, it's still, it looks good. Looks amazing.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that was just a practice stuff. But yeah, back then I didn't necessarily because I was the production artist. Like I didn't necessarily have a direct connection with the backdoor conversations regarding how the game should be designed or what they were doing. I was mainly involved in the daily production of assets and textures, and I've done some level work. Uh, I believe for that going back to the question about different levels of detail stuff between Rogue Leader and Rebel Strike, because Rogue Leader was mainly flight missions, right? You were in a spacecraft and going around doing the missions, and we had the foot missions on the in the Rebel Strike game. So we had to come up with levels a little more detailed. I believe that at Factor 5, they were developing a new level tool, just level texturing tool in a way. So I worked on that with another programmer, and that was I will basically stamp particular tile, create a tile, and then stamp them, create a tile, stamp them, and create something like hot level, the snowy levels. And one of the, I don't remember the name of the level. It was like a kind of valley where you're on the foot just shooting at droid soldiers.
Hmm. So how much would it
Yeah,
take to just do one? Approximately how much time would it take?
one level like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I worked on a couple of weeks probably because basically I will create tiles, small tiles, and then those tiles I'll use so the tool that was developed was letting the artist to pick a tile and stamp it on the level. So you're just going around like one by one, stamping, rotating the stamp, and then just to making sure that it makes sense when you're on the ground level. So and the texture levels need to be reasonable so that it doesn't look like that the main character running around a blurry environment. So it was always a challenge to do that at that time because the texture memory is always a problem. Even nowadays, it's a problem for the really modern hardware. But back then, imagine the tiles that I was making probably like 32 by 32 or 64 by 64. Um, and some of the ground levels were done that way. Just basically an in-house developed level tool, if I remember right.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. Did you ever try and chime in a design idea to the designers?
Oh, like I said, Star Wars, universe is generally like well established in terms of even back then in terms of like characters, who is who, what's what, and then we were just I think targeting Star Wars experience, just trying to create an experience from the movie. So I don't think that the company Factor Five had a lot of like design choices to make, but sometimes during the production you just interact with other people daily, like level designers or the programmers, and sometimes you talk to a programmer. Let's say I was working on this, was it Yavin where the big temples are? I made those big temples too, and then there were like you're flying over like kind of foresty environment. I mean, obviously we didn't have the hardware budget to really do that. I mean, the polygon budget or the texture memory budget. So I had to create literally like trees with couple polygons, and then we had to fly over, make a flyover, but it still need to look like an impression of a forest, right? It had to give you the impression of such environment, even though we didn't necessarily have that. So you will just constant talk to the programmer, try something, and then go back. Like, can we just try this? And talk to the production, the producers or the production managers to figure out how long this is going to take, how much more we need to work, and when to stop. When you have to stop at some point, you can't just keep forever. So the way we did it back then, so basically the middle part. So let's imagine it like a little area of trees. So the middle part is just some polygons, just one giant polygon with a bunch of displaced points, vertices, and uh, then some textures on it, and then we put like trees around that, the periphery of this patch. So that kind of gave the impression of when you're flying with a spacecraft flying over it, it doesn't suck. So that's kind of what we were trying to make, something that doesn't suck because we had hardware limitations. We couldn't really do as much, even though you could do like instancing and other tricks even back then in the game engine, I believe, but you are still limited with polygon count per frame. And I think I mentioned this before. We were targeting 60 frames per second. I think one thing that you will realize when you play the game how smooth it is.
Yes.
So that's because we were always trying to be working with optimization in mind, like constantly. Like let's say I'll always have a polygon budget. I couldn't just go, like work on a creature with unlimited amount of number of textures and polygons, I always like had to work within say 300 to 2500 polygon range, and sometimes that will include their tools or their weapons as well. And that's same with the foliage. Foliage is you even have less polygon budget, because then when we use them, we use a lot of them, like the ferns or the in the ender level where you do this speeder bike chase. You have a lot of trees, right? You have a lot of foliage on the ground. They're all very simple geometry, but we were just trying to create the experience. So physically correct, accurate models, it wasn't necessarily the main target, but we were just trying to create an experience. If what we did was good enough for the experience, then we will stop at that point, because like I said, the FPS was very, very important for the gameplay.
Yeah, well, it was pretty solid in terms of the frame rate, but the other thing is Rogue Leader specifically is probably one of the best looking games on the GameCube.
Yeah.
And it was a launch title as well, which is crazy. So
Yeah.
you guys had already pulled it off, tapped into the hardware fully right at the beginning of the generation.
Yeah, I think that there were, I mean, you remember these guys, original Factor 5 people, they made Turrican on Commodore 64 and Amiga, I believe. And, they always understood the frame rate and gameplay. Having such background was really, really important for those games, I believe. That kind of experience was important. You couldn't just put any game developer in place of Factor 5 and hope that such game will come out properly for the release. I felt like when I was working with them, I felt like they really understood this part of the process, the FPS and the how to make the game looking good at the same time.
Do you find it harder to draw something that's based off an existing property or drawing something from scratch, right? Because say with Star Wars, you are limited in how far you can take it because it has to conform to a certain design philosophy, doesn't it? It has to look a certain way. Whereas opposed to you making something off the top of your head, right? You have the freedom to make it however you want to make it.
I think that it's harder to actually build something existing, especially for Star Wars, because they'll shred to death if you kind of miss a point on a character or a spaceship, right? That's what I think. Like, resemblance is generally hard, and resemblance of a known entity is even harder. So I personally feel like even though you might have a lot of reference, etc., but getting the impression or the realistic look of that particular character is generally harder, especially if you're working in films. I mean, you have to be dead on with everything to really make it pull it off. But the games are more forgiving, right? You're flying over, let's say, a snowy terrain. There are some snow troopers down there. You can't really get close to them, but at the same time, they have to look right, whether you are close to them or not. If you are making fundamental mistakes with the asset, they'll still look wrong.
Yeah. How do you think a game like that would be made today, right? Because you've got a lot of open source software. Obviously,
Yeah,
Blender, Unreal, although I don't know if Unreal is technically open source, but
it's
you know what I
source
mean.
open. I think it's source open. Yeah,
Yeah. But obviously, you have all these different proprietary software
yeah,
that obviously helps streamline things compared to back in the day. But then you've got other challenges with that, I suppose, as well.
right. Yeah. So first of all, when I was working in games, there weren't game engines for like downloadable game engines. Even if there were, they were like very primitive. Like everyone had to make their own game engine back then, including Factor 5. I most likely LucasArts too. And I'll tell you this, we will hear stories about Unreal, and Unreal had a price tag on it for $1 million back then. So if you wanted the Unreal 25 years ago, Unreal Engine, which probably was like 1% of what it is today, it was $1 million. So, and that's why I think most studios really were creating their own game engines. And also, you're working with specific hardware. It's not clear if Unreal is going to work on it or not. So do you see what I mean? So back then, this wasn't necessarily possible given, like in many ways, because there weren't many developers out there. There were many game engines out there. So you couldn't really pull this off that way. But nowadays, it is really possible to make a game like Rogue Leader with like less time, especially because there are so many references out there, models. I mean, you can't just buy a Star Wars model and put it in your Star Wars game, right? You need to have the rights, the IPs, whatever. But let's say you have all that stuff, and George gave you the license to make a game, modern game. You could really pull it off and make some even better looking game nowadays. Given you can iterate without the real hardware, and your artist can actually work in the game, test everything in the game, and we have so many other tools. Back then when I started, like I said, there were 3D painting, there were normal maps. I mean, I'm sure technically normal maps was known, but baking a normal map was not a thing. I think that came out somewhere in 2003 or maybe after 2004, like being able to bake light maps and stuff like that. But nowadays, all that is so easy, and it doesn't necessarily cost you. Between Blender and Unreal, you can. It's all about your time, how much time you want to put in this, right? It will be pretty much free to create this stuff, including the hardware. I mean, the hardware is cheap too, given how much power they provide.
Would you like to see a remaster of those games or a remake of some
Yeah,
sort?
totally. Yeah, for sure, for sure. You mean for like a Nintendo or like the
Oh, for
PC
whatever.
version?
If they made it across all platforms or even on
Yeah,
PC or Xbox,
yeah,
I just think a remake or a remaster of those games would be great. Because I think one of the biggest problems is you don't have access to them currently in their current form.
yeah.
Um, and I think a
The
remaster or
funny
remake.
thing is that you could probably use the same model, just update the textures.
Yeah, you could. So
Yeah,
if they wanted to hire you as a contractor to do a remaster, you'd be up for it
yeah,
if you had the time.
yeah, for
That is.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Totally. I mean, it's something I've done, and it will be really nice to go back and work with those guys again on a remastered version for sure, for sure. Uh, and we have so many, like, it's not just about being able to model something or texture something, but rendering engines improved so much. For instance, when we were working on Rogue Leader, we didn't, I mean, there weren't really that many, Earth-like levels, but I remember there was a new sky model published in SIGGRAPH, and they were able to implement it for Rebel Strike, and the skies look so great, like so awesome. Suddenly, like it was like a switch, right? Because it just kind of gave a sense of like atmosphere or environment because of this new sky model, a real-time sky model.
Hmm.
And nowadays, we have all kinds of rendering techniques and rendering methods. I mean, even the hardware is insanely powerful nowadays. Uh, I mean, if you're making a Rogue Leader game, it should look like a movie now. Yeah, that should be the target,
Yeah,
like
I
exactly like a movie.
definitely agree. Yeah. I'm
And it's
surprised there
possible.
hasn't been another one. They haven't made another
Yeah,
one since.
if you ever talk to them, just bring it up.
Yeah, I definitely will. Definitely will. Are you able to disconnect yourself from your work in terms of the fact that like you can appreciate it for what it is? Because I know with some creatives, right, you can create something and then you look back on it in hindsight and you look at all the things that are wrong with it or the stuff you would have fixed. And obviously, as an artist, you're constantly improving as well. But
Yeah,
are you able
yeah.
to just look at your previous work and just enjoy it, or do you always see the flaws in it?
Uh, if if you're talking about just historical viewpoint, I think we need to judge everything by their time, when they were made, how they were made. the hardware limitations of that time. So given that, to answer your question, I think we did what we could at that time. So I'm not really being harsh on myself or our teammates back then. But if there's a chance or opportunity to improve them, there's a lot of ways. There are a lot of ways to improve them, and we could even do much better because now most of those guys are working on various companies, like Epic or other companies. So we also know how to make things better. You know what I mean? So we could probably make even them better because, like I said, back then most of us were much younger. We didn't really understand the hardware. Like artists didn't really understand the hardware. We didn't really know anything about the GameCube because, like I said, we never owned them. Didn't necessarily have a chance to play with them, and all we had was just numbers that were given to us. You have 2,000 polygons for this character, and that's generally I think we were just targeting something like this, 50 to 100,000 polygons per level. I mean, right now, like your phone can probably do a couple million polygons easily,
Yeah.
F-frame. So basically, there were, real harsh, solid limits on us. So that way, I don't think that I don't look back and say, oh God damn it, I did a horrible job with this one or horrible job with that one. I think everyone tried their best to do what was possible with that hardware at that time.
Because you know how to do coding now, don't you?
Little
You're
bit,
not
yeah,
just, your expertise isn't just in art. You know how to do
yeah,
quite a lot of different things.
yeah,
Yeah. How
yeah. I
so
mean,
you taught yourself all this stuff? Obviously, I'm
yeah, I
guessing.
did. I learned programming myself. I learned mainly to uh, actually I wanted to make a small kind of arcade game myself. Small thing. I
Oh,
started
cool.
back then. I was using Godot engine when the Godot engine came out first, and I started using it. And I was just testing some ideas with it, and then I also realized, damn, knowing programming is one thing, but if you're working in 3D programs, if you want to do 3D stuff, you have to kind of also study math and physics. I started learning physics and studying math, even though I hated when I was a kid. But I was like, God, why didn't they teach this stuff like this? That
Yeah.
you use this sine function to make this, or like when you're in school, they are teaching you all this stuff in like some abstract reality in another dimension. But they have really real applications and real world uses. So anyway, so that's kind of how I started learning programming and start doing things. And then now I mostly use Python to make add-ons and stuff for Blender or other stuff.
Are you at all worried by AI and programs like Midjourney that can just
Oh,
create artwork from scratch?
and I think that's a very there's no easy answer to this, as you know. It's a it's a very complicated topic. It doesn't just involve art or AI models are stealing artwork. I feel like humans created a hole that they can't much deeper hole than they can handle, if you will, with the AI stuff. So
Yeah.
at some point, we have to wait and see how it's unfolding. But at the same time, we need laws to protect artists because um, this kind of technology creates overproduction and saturation of the market, and that's kind of the main problem with this stuff. Like right now, for instance, these AI models can create simple 3D geometry models, stuff like that. So they don't have real production value right now, but in, let's say, 3 or 4 years or 6 months, they might be able to just create like Marvel level, Marvel movie level as production work or assets. And then that means hundreds of people out of work, or people who are really good at this, right? Creating works or assets or sculpts for Marvel projects or designs for Marvel projects. At the same time, that's the reality. It's coming up, and it will affect our industry, our business, depending on where you are, positively or negatively, right? If you're you're a producer, you're
Yeah,
trying to cut the costs always.
of
It's
course.
great.
Yeah.
But if you're on the ground and you're trying to make a living from this, then it's a hard problem to handle because first of all, these models devour internet and sample everything everyone ever said, everyone ever done, and then mix them together and come up with something relatively new. Not necessarily new because they need humans. These AI models need human output to be able to do what they're doing right now. So in a way, that's kind of hard. Either we have to shut down internet so they stop doing what they're doing, these models and their people behind them, um, or find a unique way. But at the same time, I'm really hopeful because you know organic beings are very persistent. Like we survived on Earth, for billions of years, went through a lot. So this might be a minor annoyance for human beings at the same time too. It's really, really hard to say. You know what I mean? It's just, yeah, it's scary. Like they're gonna, these models are gonna steal our job, but at the same time, something better might come out of it too. At the same time, if you want.
Well, it's not even just art, right? Because AI in general
Yeah,
has taken off and it's almost infiltrated so many different industries. I mean, my
right.
view on it is you probably shouldn't be a master of one thing. You should probably
Yeah,
diversify and try and have like a very diverse skill set just to
right.
prevent yourself from your work becoming obsolete.
Right.
Yeah, which
I
you
mean,
seem
that's
to
what
have
I try
done
to do.
because you can do a lot of
Yeah,
things,
that's
so
what I thought.
you're okay.
Yeah, I do recommend, like, first of all, like some people like to be specialized in one thing, where they just want to model heads all their lives. I have friends like that, and I've done heads and sculpt stuff like that. Am I as good as them? Probably not, but that's one way to take a look at it. Like one way, if that's fulfilling your life as a profession, as an art form, hey, that's great. There's nothing wrong with it. But the point you're raising here is very, very important. There's like at some point an AI model will be able to create a 3D model of a head from a single photo or a webcam photo, and they'll be able to print this, using a 3D printer at a much cheaper cost. And at that point, your job is in danger, right? If you're a sculptor. The other side of the coin is this: we human beings really like human touch in things, right? Like let's say I showed you a sculpture and I said this is done by a human. I'm lying to you. It's done by a machine, right? Let's say a sculpture that's made by a machine, but I'm telling you that it's done by a human being. You will have some kind of affection towards this sculpture, artistically, let's say. But then when I tell you this is actually no, I lied to you. This is actually done by a machine. Then you will be remorse. You will remove all those feelings you had toward this artistic work prior, right? You're just going to remove yourself from that. You will disattach yourself in a way. So we actually like things that are by humans. We're not necessarily putting the AI art at the same level as human art. So we haven't done that yet. As long as that's the case, as long as we have the human side towards the artwork that's created by humans versus machines, I think there's always going to be a market for humans because human artists. Although it sounds funny, human artists, robot artists, or AI artists, but eventually it will get there. And I feel like that. I feel like we need to segregate human art versus AI art. Let's say there's art station for artists, right? Real artists who are really putting their time, their sweat, their tears, whatever. And there are the AI artists. They just use AI as a tool. I don't think we should mix them. Like they should be showcasing their works in different places to help both sides. So as far as the AI art, that's kind of where I am, how I'm looking at it. They are not necessarily the same thing. They're completely different things. And I think we should treat them as such. But in production, in movie production or game production, these things will have real effects, negative effects, and a positive effects. So you will be able to just sit down, prompt your game, and this thing will create a game from scratch, right? Not using a single artist, not using a single programmer, and you'll be able to create your own game. But how many games can you play a day? Like how many prompts can you do? That's like we have limited lives. We don't have infinite consumption powers. And there's that too. Yeah, that sounds really great, being able to make a game. But you know what? I still like to play the games that I played when I was a kid. I don't want new games. I was happy with the ones that I played. Do you know what I mean? It's not
Yeah, yeah,
overproduction. Being able to produce a lot of stuff in like in a split second is not necessarily a good thing. You're just going to overpopulate the market, and just then it becomes a curating problem. So you have a million, let's say every year 5 million new games are added to Steam, right? Five
yeah,
million new games sounds crazy, but that's doable in a couple of years. But who's going to play it? Let's say Steam has 20 billion games on the Steam marketplace, and we are total 8 billion people. Like how many games? Like, you know what I mean? And there's that problem, the oversaturation of the market. I just read that Spotify removed like millions of AI generated
yeah.
music,
That's right. That's
right?
right.
So it's a battle that needs to be done, taken properly, seriously. But at the same time, the speed of creation is going to outperform the speed of filtering too. So that's another problem. Like, let's say Spotify will be removing 5 million songs a day, but then 50 million songs will be submitted every day. And I think I'm not really sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I feel like that's where we are right now as far as the AI being part of art nowadays.
Yeah, it is. It is scary in a way,
Yeah.
because obviously, I think even already, right, the gaming industry, film industry, music industry have already
Right.
have oversaturation anyway. I would
Yeah.
say, yeah, it's very hard to filter out things. I mean, I'm not sure about yourself, but a lot of game developers that I speak to, they don't even get the opportunity to play games. They have very
Yeah.
limited time, right? I mean,
Right.
I host a gaming show and I don't even get that much time to play video games.
Right.
So and then if you add in all these AI games on top of that, it would be impossible to stay up with everything.
Yeah. I think that in the end, eventually the quality will need to be part of the equation, not the quantity.
Yes.
And I would think that quality will be judged by how many humans worked on it or how much human effort went into it. I think that's still a formula for value. Human effort is still a formula for value, and that's probably not going to change. It changes its form, but it's always going to be there. Like someone is going to say, you know what, I spent 5 hours prompting this, and that's going to be more valuable than someone is saying, you know what, I just did 5 minutes prompting this. You know what I mean? It's still
Mm.
the human time is going to be the main decisive point in understanding this stuff, understanding how high quality it is, or understanding how valuable this game or art is. So humans are always going to be in the loop, and anyone who's not including humans in the loop is just going to saturate the market. Is just going to overflow the market. I mean, that's a way to shut down the system with coming up with something new, maybe. But um, it's very hard because there are a lot of people out there who want to make really quick money, right? They want to be able
Oh
to just
yeah.
make really quick money.
Yep. In every industry too. Every industry.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
quality's
I,
constantly compromised.
I'll ask you this. I mean, I saw the other day people were creating podcasts, conversational podcasts using ChatGPT and
Yeah,
some voice
yeah,
AI
yeah.
stuff too. So, like, how do you take that? Like, what's your take on AI models creating nonsense podcasts? I mean, I'm sure there's an audience for it, but
Oh well, I don't like it, but I kind of
yeah,
find there's two mindsets you can have. You can either try and fight it, and
right,
then you end up being like the dinosaur, and you just go extinct, right? Because you're
yeah,
just too busy trying to fight it, or you just accept it for what it is and find a way to try and deviate or pivot somewhat. I mean, even YouTubers, right? There's so much rubbish on YouTube. People posting videos all the time. It's just absolute garbage, but they're just doing it to
yeah,
get ad revenue. So It is what it is. It's just it. Luckily, I don't rely on this like to put food on the table, so it's cool.
Yeah.
So I think if I had to rely on it, and then it could become a problem, which is part of the reason why I wouldn't want to rely on it, because then I'd have to possibly compromise the quality, because desperate times, desperate measures, and then you result in doing stuff that morally you wouldn't do, but you have to do because you need to make money to put food on the table. So then,
Yeah.
yeah, so you understand my point though, right? So,
Yeah, you're right. I do. I think there are like going back to production using AI. So there's the biggest problem. There are two problems that I see. The biggest problems myself think as the real problem. Now, I'm not saying AI models stealing artist artwork is not a real. That's a real problem that can be somewhat resolved and handled through law and education, educating people about what's right to do, what's wrong to do in a way. But there are two big problems here. First of all, let's say you have been doing these podcasts, talking to people, and you realize, you know what, you don't even need to talk to people. You can just talk to AI and create really exciting podcasts that people listen. And then you realize you don't even need to be there, right? Then you let AI to talk to AI, whatever. Then you train AI to ask the question that you generally ask, let's say. But the problem is this: you did that and you made a lot of money, but you forgot how to be a podcaster. You forgot the skill. You forgot the trade. You know what I mean? You stop investing in podcast hardware, and the podcast hardware makers stop making podcast hardware. You know what I mean? Like there's going to be a kind of long effect on humanity. Like you remember, people don't kind of know how people did paint back in the Renaissance. There was a kind of disconnect. I'm not saying they don't know how to do it, but just we don't always know how a master did something. Like how they made this, what kind of pigment they use. If you're just trying to find it retroactively, because the skill set, the traits, kind of lost in the translation along the way. And I think AI is going to make us forget all that stuff too. So I think that's one of the main dangers, where we rely on AI to create beautiful portraits, beautiful artwork, beautiful this, beautiful. But as we like this stuff and as we use this to create more and more and more stuff, we're also giving up our own time to practice this stuff. I think that's a really important problem. So if you're an artist trying to use AI in your artwork, please keep this in mind. Yes, it's going to make you make money faster, but at the same time, there's a trade. There's always a cost to everything. So if they're making money in the short term, you might be giving up some other stuff that you learned, spend all your life learning. And the other thing is these AI models in the future, where they'll govern our lives. They'll tell what we should like, what you should listen, what you should watch. We
they're
tell
already
you who
doing it.
you are. Yeah, they're all like acting psychiatrists, whatever, psychologists for you. I think there's a problem with the free will here, where will we have free will in the future? And I think that is something we have to really think thoroughly, because we can't give up everything in life except free will, because that's what makes us human. That's what kind of separates us from the rest. And if we think that's a valuable thing, the free will is the last battleground that we should be fighting for, especially the artists, in my opinion. Because free will gives us the ability to be unique, be ourselves, live different lives, sometimes work towards common goals, sometimes not, sometimes we work hard for ourselves. And we are able to create, build our own lives. But in the future, this might not be as a unique experience per person, if you will. I don't know if that makes sense, but those are the main areas that I feel like AI is going to have big impact, negative or positive, in the long run.
Just to tie it back to Star Wars, I mean, that franchise would be one of the ones that I think it would be easy to manipulate with AI the most, because you already have pre-existing assets that you could funnel through AI to create stuff. I mean, we're not quite there yet, but it could theoretically, you could have like a new Rogue Squadron game that's based off all these assets from the movies.
Right.
You might not be able to tell the difference. That's my worry.
Yeah, I mean, they only do that like using GTA 5. I've seen someone doing like a GTA 5 trained on GTA 5 data frames like gameplay,
Yeah,
and this game was able to hallucinate the game in a different context, like
yeah,
different like the hallucinating levels that were based on the what it saw and the thing, right? The similar color scheme, similar kind of car looking things or human little, but you could tell it was a car game. But that car game or to that level didn't exist in GTA 5 originally. So uh, my point is that it's gonna get there where they're just gonna play. Let's say 100 people will play Rogue Leader or Rebel Strike, and all that data will be fed into um, the AI model, and the AI model will come up the remastered version
mm,
that you have been looking for
yeah,
all these years.
yeah. Well,
I mean,
hey,
it is possible. Yeah,
yeah. As much as I'd love to keep talking to you, I will wrap up there
yeah,
and let you get back to doing what you're doing. Thank you so much for taking time out. I very much
yeah.
appreciate it. I'm advocating for remasters or remakes of those Rogue Squadron games.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And if it can get you additional work, hey, that'd be great, eh?
yeah. If I meet them, I'll tell them that we need a remastered version. Everyone that has been asking me about it.
Yeah, because otherwise the only way to play them currently is you either have to have a GameCube or you have to illegally download a ROM. So,
Right, for sure, that makes sense. That makes
yeah.
sense. Yep. I
Hmm.
hope they make it again.
Hmm. All right, everyone. That is the show. Make sure you share, like, and subscribe. And until next time, stay safe.